Hi, I'm California Trust Litigation Attorney Scott Grossman. It's very common for clients to insist on getting an account from their trustee, but once they receive it, they're not quite sure what to do with it. In this video, I'll be discussing what you should examine in the account that you receive. In this video, I'll be answering the following 6 questions. First, what if the account doesn't balance? Second, what if the trustee has used the wrong format for the account? Third, what if I see a suspicious transaction in the account? Fourth, what if there are losses on sale? Fifth, what if I wasn't given notice in advance of the trustee's actions? Sixth, what if the schedule of assets is incorrect? When you receive the trustee's account, the very first thing you should examine is the summary of account to see if the account actually balances. If the account doesn't balance, then you know in advance there are almost certainly unreported transactions or there's unreported property that's causing the account to be out of balance. That is a problem and something that we can address when we get to damages. The second thing to look at are the actual entries themselves. And what I'm talking about here is actually the format of the entries rather than their substance. You want to make sure that each entry has a date associated with it and a person or entity. In other words, money came in or money went out to someone or something that's identifiable. There should be a description of the transaction itself. So either something is being paid for or there's some reason that money came in. And finally, the amount of the transaction. The reason this is important is a trustee has to account for every financial transaction that takes place. They can't do what are sometimes called block entries. In other words, if the trust is receiving income from a rental property, then the monthly rent should be reported. What would be improper would be for the trustee to show all the rent that was received for the year in one entry. The third thing you should examine in the account is each individual entry and apply the common sense test. Does this transaction make sense? You want to look through this to make sure that what's being reported actually applies to what's happening in your trust. Now that may sound a little silly at first, but I can tell you in practice it's not. The reason is a dishonest trustee isn't going to accurately report what went on. They will try to cover up the nature of the actual transactions, either with vague descriptions or even actively misleading descriptions. If this appears to be going on, then it's going to be important in the course of discovery to get the underlying documents for each of the transactions to see what it is that actually occurred. The fourth item you want to examine in the account are any losses on sales. Now, losses on sales in and of themselves are not necessarily a source for concern, and that's why it's important to examine the individual entries. There could be a loss on sale that is absolutely nobody's fault. There was simply no way to avoid it. For example, if there's stock that is owned by the trust on the day the settlor died, and the trustee doesn't actually get control over the account for, let's say, 3 weeks after death, and in that time a stock has declined in value, well, if the trustee sold it at that time, they haven't done anything wrong. They didn't cause this to happen. They weren't negligent. It was simply unavoidable. Now, the flip side is also important. If that loss was avoidable, or worse, if it was caused by some sort of negligence or deliberate misconduct by the trustee, then that's something you're going to want to address as part of a surcharge petition. The fifth item you want to examine is the petition, if there is one, that accompanied the account. Now, I say it that way because if there's been informal trust administration, meaning there haven't been trust proceedings, you may get an account from the trustee that doesn't have any sort of petition or report attached to it. That can be a problem if the account isn't just completely transparent. On the other hand, if the trustee has provided a report on their own, whether or not they've gone to court, or if there's been a petition to approve the account, you want to read that document. And what you're really looking for in there is what's being reported. Did the trustee make a claim that they gave you advance notice of something they were planning to do or something they were planning to avoid? And as a result of that, there's some transaction that's reported in the account. For example, a loss on sale. Now, if that's been done and it really happened, that's fine. There's no problem. They're being honest. If, on the other hand, they're attempting to cover their tracks by claiming this notice was given when in fact it was not, that's something that you need to address as part of a surcharge petition. The sixth item you want to examine in an account are the assets on hand at the beginning of the account period and the assets on hand at the end of the account period. The reason you want to do this is you want to make sure that all the assets are actually reported in the account. Now, assets can change form. For example, if there's a house that's sold during the course of the account, then though there's a house that's reported on the schedule of assets at the beginning of the account period, that house is not going to be reported at the end of the account period. What should happen is that cash that was netted from the sale should be something that's reported in the account itself. Tricky trustees, dishonest trustees will attempt to disguise what they've actually done with trust assets. For example, if there's a new vehicle that's purchased, I've seen it where a trustee attempts to simply insert one vehicle for another, never showing what was actually done with the car that was disposed of. Well, there should be some amount of cash that came back into the estate under those circumstances. So go through the account, see if there's a bona fide reason that the type of assets on hand changed, and if that change is reported. If it's been done, you're fine. If not, if there's no good explanation why assets that were there at the beginning are no longer there at the end, there's a problem with the account. Now you know what to look for when you're examining the account you receive. If you've got the account and you believe there's a problem, you're going to want to consider filing a petition to surcharge the trustee. That's what I'm going to discuss in the next video. If you found this video helpful, then please hit the subscribe bell, leave us a comment. We'll be glad to respond if you do, and give us a thumbs up.